Labour's Shadow Health Minister, Jamie Reid, joins us now from Carlisle. Good afternoon, Mr Reid.
Afternoon.
Why won't Labour commit to meeting the £8 billion funding gap in the NHS by 2020?
We're committed to give the NHS the resources it needs. We've been absolutely clear about that. We're the only party with a properly costed, properly funded plan for the National Health Service. And when David Cameron says he's going to put an extra £8 billion in, nobody believes him. Nobody can explain where the money's coming from. You might as well ask people to believe in ghosts. There's no evidence that this money exists. And so that is a completely false promise, I'm afraid.
But it totally exists with you. Why don't you, as the self-styled party of the NHS, why don't you commit to making that, meeting that £8 billion funding gap?
We've been absolutely clear, and be clear again now, that we'll give the NHS all of the resources that it needs. We've been consistently clear that we'll meet Conservative spending plans if they're real, and our £2.5 billion is in addition to that. But we have to be credible, we have to be realistic about what we can afford to spend, and we have to show where money is coming from when it's going into the National Health Service. So far, we're the only party that's able to do that.
So, just to be clear, the £2.5 billion that you are promising in the early part of the next Parliament, should you win the election, or at least form a government, that's not a down payment towards the £8 billion, is it?
The Time to Care Fund, the £2.5 billion Time to Care Fund, is a discrete fund which goes into the National Health Service to pay for 20,000 more nurses, 8,000 more GPs, 5,000 more home care workers, 3,000 more midwives. It's a specifically costed fund.
So even with this £2.5 billion, which is already earmarked for particular things, there would still be an £8 billion funding gap by the end of this decade. Is that right?
We're not saying that, Andrew. We're saying we'll give the NHS the money it needs, and we're saying that the Time to Care Fund that we're talking about and that we've pledged, and which Ed's talked about implementing in the first 100 days of a Labour government today, is a specifically costed fund raised with revenue from specific places.
Right, but my understanding is that the £2.5 billion, which does come from various sources, we'll come on to that in a minute, isn't to cover any funding gap. It's all for new commitments. It will go to a new cancer test guarantee, a new cancer treatment fund, a new mental health guarantee, a new GP appointment guarantee, a new midwife guarantee, a new guarantee for care at home. So these are all for new things. They're not giving £2.5 billion to help the NHS do what it already does. Is that right?
No, but this fund will help the NHS do what it already does and help it to do more of what it needs to do as well. So I think, if you'll allow me, I think we're splitting hairs on this. I think we're mixing things up here, when really the £2.5 billion Time to Care Fund is a new fund, it is an additional fund, but it will go towards meeting the very acute needs that the NHS has after 5 years of Conservative failure. So
forgive me, I'm probably being a bit thick here then. So it is a down payment towards meeting the £8 billion funding gap that will develop over the next 5 years. Is that right?
It's a specific fund. You've outlined what it's going to be used for, but of course...
But these are all additional things. These are all things that the NHS doesn't have at the moment, whereas the NHS just carrying on doing what it does at the moment will have an £8 billion gap.
But these are things which the NHS needs to do in addition to what it's already doing. In fact, one of the reasons that the NHS is in such financial difficulties is because it hasn't been doing these kinds of things. So these investments is going to make the NHS more efficient. It is going to help finances get under control. But we've made it absolutely clear, Ed's made it clear today, we'll make it clear again today, that the £8 billion that David Cameron has pledged does not exist. No. But we will always give the NHS the money that it needs.
So you will give it the £8 billion. Why don't you just come out and say, we will commit to the £8 billion?
We've said we will give the NHS the money that it
needs.
What's
the problem? I mean, why can't the word 8 pass your lips?
No, we've said we'll give the NHS the money that it needs, and we've said
which is £8 billion.
We've said that this is an additional fund, a £2.5 billion fund. It's going to pay for 20,000 more new nurses, 8,000 more GPs.
No, you've said all that. All right. I mean, I don't understand why you just don't say we commit to the £8 billion, but never mind. The £2.5 billion you're going to pay for by various means. But the biggest part of that will be the biggest chunk of the £2.5 billion will come from the so-called mansion tax. Is that right?
That's correct. £1.2 billion.
OK, so on the mansion tax, it will be levied on properties worth over £2 million, right?
Correct.
So if it's a £3 million property, will the mansion tax be on the difference between 2 and 3 million, or will it be on the whole 3 million?
These details will be set out in the first Labour budget, but we've been
absolutely clear. It's not a detail, it's a fundamental principle. Can you not tell us?
These are details that will be putting forward, hopefully when we win power in the next couple of
Why
weeks.
can't
But
you
the
tell
Mansion
us
tax,
now? Your NHS depends on it.
the Mansion tax will raise £1.2 billion in its first full year of implementation.
What
It will
will
raise
the
hundreds
first
of
full
millions
year
of
be?
pounds. Sorry, Andrew, I didn't catch that.
What will the first full year be?
The first full year will be hundreds of millions of pounds. Clearly,
No,
we
no.
can't expect...
What financial year will be the first full year?
Oh, if we win power in the next few weeks' time, we will introduce, in the first Labour budget, we will introduce the Mansion tax.
Yeah,
So we
but
won't
when will
be
the
expecting
revenue start to come on stream?
The revenue will start to come on stream this financial year, but we would not expect to raise the full £1.2 billion this year. You couldn't expect us to do that because we're not looking at a full financial year.
No, that would be unreasonable. But you're saying that this Mansion tax will come on stream immediately, and yet you cannot even tell us in any way how it will operate. Can you tell us what the rate of the Mansion tax will be? What will be the percentage?
Well, we do know how it would operate. The government's already introduced, I think, on homes owned by overseas companies, a mechanism through the HMRC whereby higher-rated properties, where more valuable properties can have.
So what will be the rate of the Mansion tax?
Paid upon them.
What will the rate be? What percentage will it be?
The rate of the Mansion tax, it will apply to homes over £2 million worth of value, and that will be the details that will be brought forward in the budget if we hopefully form the government in the next couple of weeks' time.
Whether the Mansion tax will be, in my example, on all the £3 million or just the difference between 2 and 3 million, and what percentage will it be, are not details, they are fundamental. Don't people have a right to know what these taxes will be?
And these taxes will be levied on properties worth over £2 million, and that money will be used to pay for improvements to the National Health Service.
But you can't tell me what the rate of the Mansion tax will be.
Throughout the country, Andrew, there's widespread support for this proposal. It's money that the National Health Service needs, and the full details of that will be laid out in the first budget in the next Labour government.
Ed Balls said that the Mansion tax couldn't come in until 2017-18.
No,
so you've changed your mind on that?
No, we haven't changed our mind on that. We've been consistently clear that the first revenue, the full revenue for the first full year will be 2016-17. Okay. But the Mansion tax would be introduced as part of the first Labour budget after the next election if we're fortunate enough to form a government.
I mean, the Mansion tax in itself, you say it raised 1.2 billion. It's relatively marginal, not for the people who have to pay it, but it's pretty marginal overall. It's important, though, and the reason I'm asking you is because it's key to your extra money for the NHS and the promises you're making for your first year. So, but if you cannot tell me what the rate of the Mansion tax will be, and you can't tell me whether it will be levied on the whole value of the house or just the increment above 2 billion, how can you sit there if you don't know that and tell me it will raise 1.2 billion?
We know, independent experts have verified this, that we're going to see hundreds of millions of pounds being raised from the Mansion tax.
What independent experts?
Introduced in the first Labour budget if we win the next general election. And in the first full year of implementation, we would expect to raise £1.2 billion. This is a popular policy. When we speak to people around the country, we know that this is a popular policy. We know that the NHS
I know you
needs
can hear
this
me,
money.
so you
we
don't.
know that we need
I know you can hear me.
in place.
So you don't filibuster by answering questions that I haven't asked. What independent experts have told you this will raise 1.2 billion?
Andrew, you know as well as I do that there's widespread support for this policy across the country. You know
I didn't ask you that.
Policy,
I agree with you. It's really popular.
Real funding.
It's a massively popular policy. It's probably the right thing. Oh, I think we've somebody's pulled the plug there. I wonder why.
It wasn't me.
I wonder why.
I didn't do it.
All right.